everyone. I wanted to do another recording, this time to talk about gear specifically and a couple of other things. Before I get into that, let me just do a quick recap. So, this recording is going to be short and simple because most of what I have said is already explained in other recordings. So this will be touching on my latest video latest recording where I was talking about how weapon tier list shouldn't be a thing because all weapons have their purpose in New World. It will also touch on the damage reduction recording I did, which talked about how much damage reduction you're truly getting from armor and a couple other topics. But those are the two main recordings that this will be touching on, I should say. Okay, so let me go ahead and get into what's on this screen now that the recap's over. So this is a really great video that recently got put on YouTube, maybe within the last day or so. The short version of this video I have up on the screen is that the method for leveling weapons to their max level, which is 20, very quickly, can be done either through PvE or PvP. If you're doing PvE, then you need to be attacking elite monsters, and they mentioned 3 areas: Dead Man's Cove at level 25, then they mentioned Brightwood Isle, level 34, and then Scorpius at level 50. These are the 3 areas where you can get your weapons to max level within 1 to 2 hours. He did say 1 hour on one portion of his video, I'm fairly certain, and I tested that. I think that it depends on how many people you have in your group, because if it's a full group, I think you can do it in 1 hour. But if you only have 1 or 2 people, I think it's going to take you closer to 2 hours to fully level out a weapon, because you don't have as many people in the group, it's just going to take longer, so on and so forth. But either way, the methods used here to level the weapons is accurate. I've tested it. The experience is good. So I'm going to link this in the description. It's also been put in that quick sheet that I've been linking time and time again. So yeah, look for the quick sheet in the about or description, I think it's called. Yeah. Okay, so with that out of the way, let me just tab over real quickly. Oh yeah, see, there it is. New World weapon purposes. That document got linked, and this video. So scrolling down. Okay. There we go. I just wanted to get that ready so I wouldn't have to reach over to grab the mouse again. But we'll get into that in a second. So let me talk about gear score, because the next thing that we need to be aware of in order to tie this information in is going to be gear score. I've Googled, searched as much as I can, just like I do with anything when it comes to sharing information and assisting with Google Documents. As far as I can tell, the consensus is, according to the community anyways, that gear score is just an indication of how strong the item is. It has nothing to do with the gameplay at all. That's it. It just deals with how strong the item is. But there's a problem with this community consensus, because I have ran into items that are lower gear score but either higher damage or higher defenses than much higher gear score items of the same category. So I don't understand what the deal is with this. Maybe it's something to do with maybe at higher levels you start to see that be more consistent, but who knows. That could I guess that could be it, but who knows. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about gear score too much. Let me go ahead and just recap the armor real quickly. So in the armor recording, and you're more than welcome to go back in my channel to watch the full thing if you want to, because I'm only giving you a piece of it, but I determined that anything after 565 physical or elemental resistance is only worth 0.064% damage reduction per point, assuming the game rounds up. So that means armor isn't exactly valuable once you hit tier 5. I think what you can do at tier 5 is you can take your crafted armor, like Orcacalum and that kind of stuff, and you can do your best to craft them with the stats that you want. I think you could probably do the same as well with your faction gear if you were just to wait until, like, you know, max level and then get a, you know, faction armor piece and then use one of their runes. I think you could do that as well, and that would achieve a similar, maybe much better way of handling getting to the stats, although I don't know if what would be the pros and cons, I guess you can say, because with the crafted armor you should be running into traits. I doubt that with the faction armor you run into traits all that much. Maybe it's just RNG, I don't know, but somebody can look into that. But either way, I would say look into either Orcalcum or the equivalent of Orcacalum, and just craft that once you reach that point, once you reach the max level, and just try to get the stats that you need for your particular build. I've got a bunch of tabs up with builds, and I'll get into the stats with that in just a moment, but for right now, let me also just talk about one other thing to be aware of. I think this is pretty important to be aware of. So I get a feeling that whoever designed the weapons and armor with New World doesn't exactly understand how things work, or at least didn't plan properly, because a good example is the Fey Dragon Musket, which is that 200 engineering. You should have the schematics for it, so you're more than welcome to scroll down the next time you go to your tool thing, your tool workshop, or whatever it's called. Scroll all the way down and look at Fey Dragon Musket. You'll notice it says 99 thrust damage, 99 arcane damage, and then look at Longshot. Longshot is pure thrust damage. The reason I'm bringing these examples up is to point out what I'm talking about, because if you look at your weapon mastery page, you will see that Musket says 100% thrust damage. Bow is 170% thrust damage when it's using a charge attack, meaning that, unfortunately, unlike the armor, weapons just don't have good design to them in this game. But unfortunately, you do need those items because, unlike armor, damage matters. So you do have to use Fey Dragon Musket or whatever named weapon applies to your build. You know, it's a much more difficult thing to deal with than the armor. So I really do hope that either they correct the weapons page and make it 100% damage, so that way if you do run to a weapon that's split 99 thrust and 99 arcane, then it applies the damage regardless. I would also ask for mastercrafted gear, and I've pointed that out in the prior recording. I can bring that up again if at the end of this recording if you want. Hopefully I'll remember to do it. But for right now, let's go ahead and talk about the builds, because like I was saying, you're going to be looking for particular stats when you craft the armor or when you buy a faction piece of armor. So under the quick sheet, you'll notice at the very last page, these are all the affixes and prefixes for the game. These are the names to each one. So let's go and go through them. For Musket, I would do Ranger on everything. Is that what it's called? Yeah. Ranger's the one that's pure dex, so I would do that on all of your musket stuff and for your bow stuff. For Warhammer, I would do Constitution and Strength, so I would go... which one is it called? Barbarian, yeah. I would go Barbarian if you're doing Warhammer. If you're doing Sword and Board, I would say Knight, because you need more Constitution than you need Strength. Let's see. Am I missing anything? Oh, yeah. So if you're doing the Live Staff, it depends on... Oh, actually, I'm sorry. Yeah, if you're doing Great Axe, I would do the same as Warhammer I would do of the Barbarian. But for Live Staff, I would say it depends on what you're using or what your intentions are for it, because if you're using it for PvE, I would just go all focus. which is Sage. Yeah, it's Sage. Okay. So I would just go Sage if you're doing PvE, but if you're doing PvP, I would say probably do. Which one is it? Oh, Cleric. Yeah, Cleric. So you get focus and Constitution, assuming that you're wanting to be a healer. But if you're going to be a hybrid healer and you want to do some damage, then I would pair the stats associated with focus with whatever weapon you're using to make that work. If you're doing Rapier, that depends on whether or not you're doing ranged or if you're using the gauntlets, the ice gauntlets. Because if you're using ice gauntlets, I would go. Which one is that? It's Assassin, yeah. If you're pairing with an ice gauntlet, I would go Assassin, which is Dexterity primary, Intelligence secondary. If you do pair it with a ranged weapon, though, I would say go for which one is it? It's crap. Dexterity and Constitution. Yeah, there it is. It's Brigand. Yeah, I would go Dexterity and Constitution if you're pairing the Rapier with a ranged weapon. If you're doing primarily spellcasting, I would say go Intelligence and Constitution, which is Occultist. Yeah, so that's pretty much like how you have to think of things, and that's probably what I would craft or try to craft in either your faction armor or your crafted armor. So on that note, I do have some final builds. These are builds that I can 100% recommend. Unfortunately, though, the New World calculator that I normally use is still broken, so I can't just link the build. So what I will do instead is I'll give a brief description and give you a couple seconds to look at them. Okay? Okay, here's the final Warhammer build. So the change that I've made since using it as an example is the Concussive Force. It's that passive right next to, oh, here, I'll try to show you. That one. So in the example builds that I was showing with the Warhammer, in the prior recordings, again, it's just an example. I didn't intend for it to be a final build, but in those builds I had Concussive Force, which is the one that says you do 10% more damage to enemies affected by Warhammer debuffs. I looked at the math and determined that the debuffs for Warhammer don't last long enough to justify taking this. However, the one above it, the one that says you get cooldown for whacking enemies with a debuff, is perfectly fine. So I've instead moved that point from Concussive Impact, I'm sorry, I keep calling it Force, but Concussive Impact over to Epitome of Bonk. My reason for this is because I know I'm a very small channel, and I highly doubt that, all the big names are going to listen to me. And all these big names are going to continue pushing this weird meta no matter what I say. So you will likely run into people with heavier armor than 565, which, as I determined in the prior recording, is 6.6% damage, roughly. So if you do run into somebody with even heavier armor, that damage bonus is going to go up much more. So this is worth more than Concussive Impact due to the state of the game, is the short version. Okay? So that's your Warhammer final build. Let's move over here. Okay. I've looked at Great Axe builds, and I disagree with how the meta has been doing it. The meta seems to go Reap, and on occasion they'll go Maelstrom. I'm perfectly okay with Maelstrom, but Reap I don't agree with, and here's why. Yes, Reap does a lot of damage, and yes, you do get some of your health back, but if you notice, even at the maximum level, the heal from Reap is only about 350 HP at its best. Maybe 400 to 450 if you're pushing, pure strength, but I don't think that would be wise. because you want to push Constitution and Strength when doing Great Axe. So while you could push it up higher if you were to use more Strength, I don't think it's a great idea. So that said, the Reap heal is not really worth it. It really isn't once you come down to it, because the cooldown of Reap is too long and it doesn't heal for too much. So instead, I have elected to do a build using Execute versus Reap, because with Execute, it's going to do more damage than Reap. It's also an uninterruptible attack. Yes, it takes a couple of seconds to wind up, but assuming that you can get the timing down, you can do an incredible amount of damage. And if you're not at a point of being able to do Execute, that's fine. Just use your auto attacks. It's not like the Great Axe does enough damage to where it can rely on its auto attacks. It's not like some of the other weapons where it actually does rely on skills. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. But that's Great Axe. Let's see. Okay, Spear. Okay, so as mentioned, Spear is a very low skill weapon and is great when paired with musket or bow, depending whatever you're doing. So with this particular build, I've made a change here, and that's Lake Sweep. It would seem that a lot of people are saying Lake Sweep is predictable, and I can agree with this to a certain level, but one other thing too that I think is missed is terrain. Unfortunately, this game is pretty buggy with terrain, not just on Lake Sweep, but other abilities like Sticky Bomb, which is under Musket. So there has been times where I'll be on uneven terrain and Lake Sweep doesn't make the connection. Or another time that I have noticed this problem is if I'm attacking, say, a Spectre, which is a floating enemy, yeah, Lake Sweep does not work on them, as far as I can see, or it has a very good chance to miss. So I understand that not everybody wants to run Lake Sweep. I think that, honestly, its damage and utility outweighs this negative, but if you don't want to run Lake Sweep, that's fine. Here's a non-Lake Sweep build. So what I've done here is I've grabbed Javelin and Cyclone. This is a one-purpose build, so what you want to do is, if you're in PvE, keep Cyclone on. But if you're in PvP, switch out Cyclone for Javelin. That way you have some way of dealing with running enemies in PvP, which will happen quite a bit, by the way. But yeah, use all light attacks, and there you go. That's how you run this build. Okay, moving on. Oh yes. Okay, so Rapier, as I mentioned, is high skill, high reward. So I don't see many people being able to achieve that skill, at least in the game's current state. But if you happen to, then this weapon is super insane, both in PvE and PvP. So how do you achieve that high skill level? Well, the problem with Rapier is that while its DPS is very high, its raw damage isn't high. So if you're only able to hit a target once, then it's not going to do a whole lot of damage. But if you can hit a target enough times, like repeatedly, then that's when you start to see the Rapier shine. So the way you have to think about things is you can't afford a frontal attack. Your entire duty is to evade or dodge, depending on the circumstance. And at some point, you should be repositioning enough times to where the enemy can't hit you and to where you eventually kill them. That is your goal with the Rapier. Because, like I said, you just don't have the ability for a frontal assault with Rapier. You don't have stamina damage. Your raw damage isn't high enough to sustain a frontal attack. It's not going to do real well against that kind of stuff. So, but this is the final build for Rapier PvP. Now, if you're doing PvE, I would just go full blood because that's where most of your damage comes from. But you can use this build for PvE as well if you want to. It should still function fairly fine in PvE, just not as effectively if it was full blood. But either way, if you want to do it that way, it would make it so this is a one-stop build and you don't have to worry about respeccing. So I guess that would be another way to look at this build. But moving on. Okay. So as mentioned, Rapier, it can pair really well with Ice Gauntlet. So I've put up a Ice Gauntlet build here. I think this is the same build that I did with my pre-release build. I think it's almost the same, if not pretty close to. But anyways, as I mentioned, Ice Pylon's really slept on because it can be used as a shield against either ranged or melee. If you have a melee user attacking you, you can play Ring Around the Rosie and hope that the melee hits the Ice Pylon instead of you. If it's a ranged user, you can hide behind the Ice Pylon, it won't be a problem. So Ice Pylon really has a lot of utilities, and I know that people have hated on me for not using, what is that? No, it's not Ice Storm, it's, what's that ability called? Oh, Ice Shower. Yeah, I know people have hated on me for not using Ice Shower on Ice Gauntlet builds, and I understand that, you know, people enjoy the ability and it helps them to level, but here's the problem with Ice Storm, is it's not versatile. I'm looking to make a one-stop build because the more I can make a build that doesn't need respects, the better it is, because then you don't have to change your memory. Your build is the exact same from level, you know, whatever to max level. So the mental memory doesn't get changed. You don't have to respec, so I want one-stop builds. And so Ice Pylon works really well in both PvE and PvP. Ice Shower, on the other hand, only really works well in PvE, because in PvP it actually is quite easy to dodge it. Ice Pylon's a lot harder to dodge, though. And on top of that, like I said, it's a great defensive tool. So there's that. As far as Fire Staff is concerned, I don't have a build-up for that, because I haven't really messed with Fire Staff, so I don't have a good grasp on what would be the best build for it. But it shouldn't be that hard to do a build with Fire Staff because of just how straightforward it is. And the same goes with Sword and Shield. So you won't find a build here for either one, but moving on. Life Staff. Yeah. Okay, so Life Staff is a weird one because you'll find this on the quick sheet, but some of its abilities do not switch over. Meaning that if you were to use the Life Staff to throw, you know, Beacon and the other ones, and then switch back from Life Staff into your weapons, some of it doesn't carry over. As the video mentioned, which is the Paladin video under the quick sheet, they said that if you were to upgrade Beacon or what's this one called again? Oh, Orb of Protection. Yeah. If you were to upgrade Orb of Protection or Beacon beyond what you see on this calculator, then it will not transfer over to your other weapon. So if you want to run Life Staff with like a melee weapon, this is how it has to be built in order for that to work. Because if you transfer over Beacon and the other one gets canceled if you buy any passives beyond this, unfortunately. It's just one of the quirks of this game. So I intended this build to be again, one-stop shop essentially. So I understand that some people want to use Beacon or Protection. Okay, fine, whatever. But just in case that you run PvE or something, I would definitely switch out one of them for the heal, because it's a much stronger heal than either one of them. And also because it has a very low cooldown. So I would highly recommend switching in between these abilities depending on what you're doing. Or if you find that you don't like one skill or the other, just switch over. This build was intended to avoid respecs just like everyone else in this list, but moving on. Let's see. Yes. Oh, crap. Come on. Stop that. There we go. Okay, so this is the Hatchet build that I've worked out, and this is a final build. So, with this particular build, I was intending to um, make it as feasible as possible for a supporting ranged weapon. Because in my prior recordings, I was saying that I think that honestly it's best used in support of the hammer or great axe, and I still believe that. So this build is intended to do just that. Now, one of the issues that you're going to have is you're going to be burning through a lot of stamina just to use this, assuming that your abilities are on cooldown. There is one way that you can handle it, and I'll give you that option to do that, and I'll show you how. So, we're going to go over here. Okay. My mouse does not want to cooperate today. But you'll notice at the bottom of the Berserk tree is uninterruptible attacks, which is avoid stagger. Honestly, there's not that many skills that cause stagger, even in PvP. So I think it's safe to go without it. And if you want to do that, you can move this point into that, which is Refreshing Throws. Refreshing Throws reduces the cooldowns on your abilities whenever you hit something with a debuff. And given that this particular side of the hatchet does cause a lot of debuffs, you should be able to proc it pretty consistently. Now, one other thing too I want to point out, and the reason to reinforce this, what I was saying anyways, is hatchet is the only way to get disease in PvP right now. It's the only weapon to cause it. Disease is that debuff that says it reduces the target's healing. Now, in the hatchet's case, once you fully upgrade it, it actually turns into a disease cloud, meaning AoE. So this is insanely valuable in its ranged form versus its melee form, in my opinion. But moving on. Okay. So here is the final musket build. I do think that this is probably the best you're going to get for PvP. I guess you could use it for PvE if you want to, but I would recommend the bow over that. So, this is what I would do for that. Like I mentioned in the prior recording, you just want to use standard attacks at 50 meters or greater, because at that range, people aren't going to really bother with you. And also, you want to be as far back as possible anyways, so you have a greater vision cone to alert you to potential threats or if you need to switch targets. So yeah, I would just stick to standard attacks. I think Shooter Stance does count as a standard attack, not an ability, because that's one of the things that I do need to test. But I think that that's the case because Shooter Stance doesn't appear to be ability, but there's one easy way to test it. If somebody wants to do this, make sure your musket has weakened defenses, which is the stamina damage, and then make sure that you find somebody who's a shield user who doesn't have high grip, which is the one that reduces stamina damage to shields. If you break that person's shield in one hit while in Shooter Stance, then my theory is correct. That Shooter Stance does indeed apply to auto attack, which is, if that's the case, that means that is the most insane ability in Sharpshooter, period, end of story. But anyways, so you have an option here, and it depends on how you want to spec it out, but I think this is probably the best. Alright, so you'll notice that it was on the screen before my mouse decided to move, because every time I try to put down the mouse back on the desk, it likes to move, but whatever. Anyways, there's that passive to the right of Weakened Defense that says you do get Empower for hitting targets with a debuff. So, that's a perfectly fine ability, because if somebody gets too close to you, like I said, you can use Stopping Power, then Sticky Bomb them, and that would result in you doing damage to them. Your other option is going with the bottom leftmost passive in Sharpshooter tree, which is the one that says critical hits or headshots do more damage the further your way. But I don't think that that's going to be valuable, because the musket's a very low critical chance to start with. It's not like the bow where it can crit no tomorrow, like no tomorrow. So I don't think that it's really worth doing that with musket. But that choice is yours. Moving on. Okay, so this is the final PvE build for the bow. Like I said, I think that its place is in PvE, not PvP. So this is what I would say is best for PvE. So the rapid attack thing, the one that's on the left side of the hunter tree, I would use that very sparingly, as it's very hard to land all 3 shots. I would save that for either when you're confident that you can land all 3, or if you think that the target's going to be standing still. Assuming, like, excavation type of stuff, like if you have a tank that's taunting them and keeping them in place, then you can for sure use your 3 attacks. So I would use that very sparingly and be very aware that it's easy to miss it. But what you should be doing most of the time is heavy attacks. You'll notice that the heavy attack thrust damage is 200% damage, which means that the only ability in this entire bow tree that can do more damage than it is probably going to be the 3 strikes, because it's 100, 100, then 150 when fully upgraded, meaning 350% weapon damage. And it does it in very short order. So, yeah, I think it will do more damage. I guess it depends on monster resistance, but maybe the poison thing will work too. But either way, so this is strictly for PvE. You want to use heavy attacks. Like I said, sparingly use your 3 attack ability in Hunter Tree. But other than that, use all the AoEs to your advantage to clear out enemies. And yeah, that's how I just really run bow, because I don't really see a point in doing anything else. So let's see. Alright, so conclusion, yeah. Okay, so conclusion. If you are to use that weapon leveling trick that I pointed out at the very start, I would just think about, what you want to do. Do you want to be a tank, right? Well, then I would say for tank, level sword and shield, hammer and hatchet. If you want to do magic damage, I would say just level fire staff, ice staff, and rapier. If you're interested in just physical damage, I would level great axe and hatchet. If you want to do ranged, I would level musket, bow, and spear, or in place of spear, level rapier. Again, it's a very high skill, high reward thing, so I'm not going to make that as a general recommendation, because there are too few people who understand how to truly make it shine. And then if you want to be a healer, I would honestly say pair it with whatever weapon that you're most comfortable with, and then just apply the stats that matter, and then go from there. Because at some point you will need to defend yourself in excavations, as you'll cause a lot of aggro as a healer. So in that regard, I would say spear would actually work kind of nice because of its ability to regain stamina. Sword and shield, I guess, could work, but it's very limited in its uses. Warhammer would be another way of doing it, because at least it has some defenses. And at the very least has a stun, so you could stun stuff and run away. Spear could do the same thing with Cyclone a little bit. It's not a stun, but it's a pushback and slow. So I would say you could swap off to those 2 weapons, stun or Cyclone, and then swap back to your heals, and that should get you out of a sticky situation in excavations. But that's really all I can do for you. I'll put everything in the description like I always do. Thanks for listening.